Hello and welcome to the Cryptocurrency News Channel. Today we're going to talk about one thing. Is the Swell XRP pump over? And we're about 2 weeks away from Swell, and every year Swell generally pumps up the price of XRP significantly. Last year it was at the peak over a 200% pump, although that only lasted like an hour and then it came back down to like 70 something percent. This year we've pumped about 30%. 35%. With respect to Bitcoin ratio, we've pumped about 50%. And now we've kind of hit a snag at around 30 cents. So are we actually going to pump more? And that's a very interesting question because we're still about 2 weeks away. And this is the exact time where in the last 2 years where XRP has actually started to pump. It basically pumped 2 weeks before Swell last year. And I think it was 2 weeks in 2017 as well. And after Swell, it obviously dumps. But this year might have been earlier because remember last year, 2 weeks from Swell, they announced that XRP was actually going to be launched sometime within the next month. They eventually launched it at Swell, like many of us actually suspected. But the launch of XRP itself at Swell didn't actually pump up prices that much. It pumped it up by a couple of percentage points, but the main massive pump was right before Swell, 2 weeks when they actually made the announcement that they were going to actually launch XRP within the next month. Now, that was a huge announcement, and I don't really see an announcement that actually is nearly as huge as that one. They might announce a new partner like Bank of America at Swell. That would be pretty big. That would probably pump the prices up some, but we've seen that the PNC announcement didn't actually do much to the price of XRP. It pumped it up a little bit, but then it fell back down. What pumps up XRP with up to 50% against Bitcoin this time was the fact that they did a bunch of media blitzes starting about a month ago and concluding about last week. We haven't had too much media blitzes since then, and I think the price has stopped reacting accordingly. However, I do think there's still anticipation going into Swell though, because I think that's what's keeping XRP from dropping right now. I think that's also continuing pumping the volume up of XRP as we get into Swell, because it doesn't really drop as we get closer and closer to Swell. The amount the volume actually drops, the low point of the volume gets higher and higher. Like the low point of the volume is around 1.5 billion right now in terms of 24-hour volume on CMC, and about a month ago the low was like 800,000. So we've actually doubled the low volume going into Swell. The high volume really hasn't crested all that much, but it's become more of a stable base going into Swell because I think there's some anticipation. Korea is playing a pretty big part in terms of like FOMOing the volume into Swell. If you look at live coin watch, you'll see that Upbit has some of the most liquidity when it actually comes to XRP right now. So because Bitcoin has dropped, XRP also has dropped dollar value, but in terms of Satoshi value against Bitcoin, it's almost reached its peak again. Around right now it's 37.27, but I've seen it as high as 37.50, and that's the highest it's been in months. I do think that a lot of people are shooting for 4,000 before Swell, and I can definitely see them going around 4,000. Now, after Swell, I do expect it to come back down. I mean, last year it didn't really come back down until after New Year's Day. I'm willing to wait to buy back in with my swing stack until it comes back down because I'm pretty sure it will. But going into Swell, I can still see like 35 cents going into Swell. So I don't quite think the pump is entirely over, especially not with respect to Bitcoin, because I do think it can gain like 10% more with respect to Bitcoin or more, depending on where Bitcoin goes. And I do actually expect Bitcoin to start recovering as we get into November. So that would boost XRP's price up as well. I originally said 40 cents going into Swell. I'm going to tone that back into 35 because the rise in price has just not been quite as much as I thought in the last few weeks. They were rising pretty steadily up until a week ago, but they've kind of cooled off since then, especially since Bitcoin has dumped back in price. Right now it's trading at around 28 cents. I still believe that getting into Swell, if Bitcoin just recovers slightly above 8,000, I do think XRP can actually get up to maybe like 35 cents going into Swell. I don't think it's going to be in the 40, 50 cent region anymore. There might be one more pump when we actually are in Swell because they'll make some kind of announcement, get people excited. It'll actually pump the volume up. But Garlinghouse did say we're nowhere near mass adoption yet. So we're still several years out in terms of mass adoption And we don't exactly know like the ramifications of mass adoption quite yet, or like how much XRP will be worth. If you look at Susan Athey's, she says, $30 within 10 years. And I think that's probably the most reasonable expectation that I've seen on the really high side, because that's still 100x where we are right now. They're targeting, right now, XRP is targeting the remittance market. That's about 3.5 billion a day. And it's going to take them several years to actually achieve that amount, if they ever actually achieve it. Right now, they're only working with MoneyGram. None of the banks have come on, unless you consider Euro Exim a bank. But I believe they're going to get like other remittance providers to slowly start using XRP in some of their corridors. I think there's only 2 corridors active right now that are actually being widely used, which is Mexican and Filipino. And I don't really see them like really suddenly doing some kind of humongous reveal at Swell, because I don't think they can just open up like 20 extra corridors at Swell. I do think Swell is more of a PR event where they actually establish more relationships. They might release 1 or 2 more big partnerships, but those partnerships are most likely going to use XCurrent, which will get people excited, but won't actually have a long-term effect on the price of XRP, at least in the next couple of months. So I would think like hopefully 35 cents going into Swell. I don't think the pump is quite over, but I think we actually have seen the bulk of it in the last month or so, because they did their media blitz about the same time as they do like a lot of their other promotions, late September, but Swell was actually a little bit delayed this year until early November. So I don't know if the next 2 weeks are really going to be huge, and they're going to have huge reveals about XRP. I think they've done most of their reveals like in September into October. They've actually like broadcasted several acquisitions, usually just generally smaller companies, go from September going into October, and they're really like trying to pump up the XRP volume so they can get the liquidity up going into Swell. And that actually they've done pretty well at, because the liquidity actually is going up, because the overall volume on XRP is actually going up, because of all the media blitzes and the anticipation of the Swell. So while I don't think the Swell pump is completely over, I do think the bulk of it is actually behind us, but I do expect maybe 35 cents when we actually get to Swell on November 7th to 8th. So that is the report, my prediction. Let me know what you think. Like and subscribe and hit that bell notifications button, and join me on my daily streams.